the summer of 2019, a wildlife biologist named Raymond Okafor was mapping a cluster of unnamed islands deep inside the Florida Everglades, places so remote that Google Maps had never captured them with a clear satellite image. He had been paddling for 3 hours through sawgrass marshes and black water channels when his canoe scraped against a muddy bank he had never seen on any chart. The island was small, maybe the size of 2 football fields, covered in ancient strangler figs and something he could not immediately explain. Dozens of objects, half buried in the peat, arranged in what appeared to be deliberate clusters. Raymond was not an archaeologist. He was not a treasure hunter. He was a man who counted alligators for a living. But what he found that afternoon would take 3 years to analyze, involve 11 different research institutions, and rewrite what historians believed about early human habitation in southern Florida. There were 20 distinct objects recovered from that island. 20 items that had no business being there. 20 things that forced scientists to ask a question they rarely ask out loud. Who was here before we thought anyone was here, and what did they know? Stay with me through all 20 of these because number 1 is the one that changed everything. And if you have never subscribed to this channel, right now is the moment to do it, because we cover stories like this every single week, and you do not want to miss what comes next. Item number 20 is where the story begins to get strange. Among the first things Raymond photographed were what appeared to be ceramic fragments, pale gray and almost glassy in texture, scattered near the eastern edge of the island. Ceramic does not survive well in the acidic peat of the Everglades. The soil conditions there dissolve organic material at a rapid rate, which is precisely why wooden canoes and fiber baskets rarely survive more than a few centuries at best. These fragments were not just present. They were intact enough to show deliberate scoring patterns on their inner surfaces. When the University of Florida's anthropology department analyzed them, the clay composition matched deposits found along the St. Johns River, more than 200 miles north of where Raymond found them. That distance alone suggests a level of trade or travel that early Floridian peoples were not previously believed to have undertaken in this region. The scoring pattern, a series of nested crescents, appears in no known Calusa or Tequesta design vocabulary. It predates both cultures by at least 400 years based on thermoluminescence dating. Nobody knows who made them or why they carried them so far south. Item number 19 was a stone tool, unlike anything cataloged in Floridian archaeology before. Florida has almost no surface stone. The peninsula is almost entirely limestone, coral, and sand. Any worked flint or chert found there had to have been brought from elsewhere, often from deposits in Georgia or Alabama. The blade Raymond found was not flint. It was obsidian, volcanic glass that does not exist anywhere east of the Mississippi River in natural deposits. The nearest source of obsidian in North America is in the American West, specifically the Rocky Mountain region. Obsidian has been found in eastern archaeological sites before, carried through long-distance trade networks, but finding a worked obsidian blade in the Everglades, in a context dating to roughly 1,000 BCE, forces a reckoning with just how far these trade chains actually stretched. The blade itself was worked with extraordinary skill. Its edges had been pressure flaked to a sharpness that rivals surgical steel. Someone took enormous care with this object. It was not a utilitarian scraping tool. It was something made with intention. Item number 18 showed something even more unexpected. It was a carved bone figurine, roughly 4 inches tall, depicting a figure in a posture that researchers described as unmistakably deliberate. Seated with knees drawn up, arms crossed over the chest, head tilted slightly back. This posture is documented in funerary traditions across Mesoamerica, the Yucatan specifically, but also in certain burial contexts in South America. It is not a posture associated with any known burial practice of indigenous Floridian peoples. The bone was identified as human femur. Someone had carved a human bone into a human shape, and they had done it with a level of artistry that suggests not a hasty ritual object but something made over time, with patience, with skill. If you know anyone who loves history or mysteries, share this video with them right now because this next part is where it gets truly unbelievable. Item number 17 was a length of braided fiber, preserved almost perfectly in the anaerobic conditions of the deep peat, Carbon dated to approximately 800 BCE. Fiber preservation in the Everglades is nearly unheard of. What made this cord extraordinary was not the fiber itself. It appeared to be made from sable palm, a native species, but the braiding technique. The pattern was a 7-strand braid using a method that, according to textile analysts at the Smithsonian, is not documented in any North American indigenous textile tradition. The closest analog in the anthropological record is found in ancient Andean rope-making traditions dating to the same general period. This does not mean someone from South America braided this cord in the Florida Everglades in 800 BCE. It means that either the technique spread in ways we do not understand, or it was independently invented here, which raises its own profound questions about human ingenuity. Item number 16 stopped the analysis team cold when they first saw it. It was a copper plate, roughly the size of a paperback book, beaten thin and incised with a design that covered its entire surface. Copper artifacts are found in the American Southeast. The Mississippian culture used copper extensively for ceremonial objects. But this copper plate predated the Mississippian period by over 1,000 years, and the design incised on it was nothing like Mississippian iconography. It was a grid of small squares, each containing a different symbol: spirals, dots, crossed lines, concentric circles. One researcher described it as looking like a key. Not a key to a physical lock, but a key in the sense of a legend, a guide to reading something else. The copper's isotopic signature traced its origin to deposits in the upper Great Lakes region, meaning it had traveled nearly 2,000 miles to reach that island. Item number 15 was a bundle of what appeared to be seeds, wrapped in the remnants of a leaf that had partially decomposed. The seeds were intact. Peat is remarkable for its preservation properties when conditions are right. Botanical analysis identified them as seeds from a plant species that does not grow in Florida, does not grow in the continental United States at all. They were from a species of capsicum, a pepper, native to Central and South America. Capsicum seeds in a Florida peat deposit dating to before European contact forces historians to confront a possibility that academic archaeology has spent decades arguing against. That pre-Columbian contact between North and South American peoples was more frequent and more organized than our current models allow. These seeds did not float there on ocean currents. Someone carried them. Item number 14 was a small clay tablet, no larger than a human palm, covered on both sides with incised marks. The marks were not random. They had clear structure, regular spacing, consistent symbol repetition, patterns that shifted at predictable intervals. 3 independent epigraphers, scholars who specialize in ancient writing systems, looked at this tablet. All 3 refused to identify it as a known writing system. All 3 agreed that the marks showed intentional, rule-governed structure. 2 of them said privately, off the record, that it reminded them most of an undeciphered script called the Indus Valley Script, a writing system from a civilization that collapsed over 3,000 years ago in what is now Pakistan and India. Nobody made that claim officially. But nobody could explain the tablet either. Item number 13 was a polished stone disc, perfectly circular, about 6 inches in diameter and half an inch thick. The stone was serpentinite, a greenish metamorphic rock not native to Florida. The disc had a hole drilled precisely through its center, and around the rim were a series of evenly spaced notches, 28 of them. Astronomers who examined it noted immediately that 28 notches on a circular disc is a number with deep astronomical significance. It corresponds to the lunar month, the number of days in a complete cycle of the moon's phases. Lunar calendars built on the number 28 appear in ancient cultures across the world, from Mesopotamia to West Africa to ancient China. Whether this disc was a calendar, a tool for tracking planting seasons, or something else entirely, the precision of its construction is undeniable. Someone made this with great care and great knowledge. Subscribe now if you haven't already. Item number 7 is the one that made one researcher cry in the middle of a laboratory. Item number 12 was a small container, carved from a single piece of wood that had been completely saturated by tannins in the peat and had thus survived the centuries intact. The wood was mahogany, Not Florida mahogany, which is a different species, but true Sweetenia mahagoni, found naturally in the Caribbean and Central America. Inside the container were traces of a resinous substance. Chemical analysis identified components of copal resin, used ceremonially throughout Mesoamerica, mixed with traces of ground bone and what appeared to be red ochre. This was not a storage jar. This was a ritual object, a container for sacred materials, made from wood that had to have come from somewhere south of Florida and carried deliberately to this remote island. Item number 11 was a length of cord from which hung a series of small animal teeth, shark teeth, fish vertebrae, and 3 teeth that took months to identify. They were jaguar teeth. Jaguars do not live in Florida. The northernmost extent of the jaguar's historical range barely reaches the southwestern United States. For jaguar teeth to appear in a pre-Columbian context in the Florida Everglades, someone had to have traded or traveled through thousands of miles of territory to bring them there. Jaguar teeth appear in elite contexts throughout Mesoamerican archaeology. They signal status, spiritual power, connection to the underworld in many indigenous cosmological systems. Whoever wore this necklace, or whatever this object was not an ordinary person in their community. Item number 10 was perhaps the most physically striking object on the island. It was a ceramic vessel, nearly complete, about the height of a large coffee mug, with a face modeled on its exterior surface. The face was not naturalistic. It was stylized, with enlarged eyes, a flattened nose, and a wide mouth showing teeth. It was painted with pigments that had partially survived, black, white, and a deep red-orange that analysis identified as coming from annatto seeds. The style of the face has no direct parallel in North American archaeological traditions. It has been compared, cautiously, and with appropriate academic hedging, to certain ceramic traditions of the Olmec culture of southern Mexico, though the comparison is contested. Whatever its origin, it was clearly made by someone who had a sophisticated tradition of ceramic art behind them. Item number 9 was a worked shell gorget, a disc of shell worn as a chest ornament, made from a species of conch not native to the Gulf Coast of Florida. The shell was Strombus gigas, the queen conch, found naturally in the Caribbean. The gorget was incised with a design that archaeologists recognized immediately. It was a version of the cross and circle motif, one of the most widespread symbols in ancient American iconography, appearing from the American Southwest to the Mississippi Valley to the Caribbean. But the specific rendering of this cross and circle, with a central dot and radiating lines between the arms of the cross, matches a design documented in the Taíno culture of the Caribbean islands. The Taíno are known from the period of Columbus's arrival. Finding this design in a pre-Columbian Everglades context suggests that the Taíno or their ancestors had contact with mainland Florida peoples far earlier than history has recorded. Item number 8 was a wooden mask, partially collapsed but still recognizable, carved from cypress and preserved because of the waterlogged conditions. The mask was full face, sized for an adult human, with hollow eyes and a carved expression that researchers universally described as serene rather than aggressive. The inner surface showed traces of red ochre, suggesting it had been worn directly against the face. Masks appear in ceremonial contexts across virtually every human culture, but this one had something unusual. Along its inner rim, someone had attached what remained of small bundles of herbs. Analysis of the dried plant material identified at least 4 different species, 2 of them psychoactive, one a relative of Datura, the other containing compounds related to those in ayahuasca preparation plants. Whoever wore this mask was not wearing it for theatrical purposes. This was a tool for altered states of consciousness used in a ritual context. Item number 7 is the one that made a researcher cry. It was a small, flat piece of shell on which someone had scratched a drawing. A simple drawing, the kind a child might make, but not made by a child. It showed 2 figures holding hands. They were small, barely 2 inches tall as rendered on the shell, but unmistakable. 2 humanoid figures side by side, their hands joined between them. There was no way to know what the relationship between these 2 figures was, what they meant to the person who scratched them into the shell, whether this was a lover, a child, a parent, a friend. But in the middle of a laboratory full of ancient and inexplicable objects, this one small drawing of two people holding hands crossed every boundary of time and culture and reminded everyone in that room that the people who left these things behind were not mysteries. They were human. They loved someone, and they wanted to remember it. Comment below if this gave you chills. You are not alone. Item number 6 was a collection of what appeared to be gaming pieces. 23 small clay spheres of uniform size, along with a flat clay disc marked with concentric circles that appeared to be a playing board or target. Games are universal in human cultures, and the presence of gaming pieces in an archaeological context is not unusual. What was unusual here was the uniformity of the spheres. Their diameter varied by less than half a millimeter across all 23, suggesting a level of standardization that implies either a sophisticated manufacturing process or extraordinary individual skill. They were made from the same clay as the fragments in item number 20, suggesting they were produced by the same hands or the same community. These were not casual objects. They were manufactured with purpose. Item number 5 was a bundle of feathers, impossibly preserved, wrapped in what had once been a piece of tanned hide. The feathers were from at least 3 different bird species, one of which was identified as a scarlet macaw, a bird not native to North America, found naturally in Central and South America. Scarlet macaw feathers appear in ceremonial contexts throughout the American Southwest, carried through established trade networks from breeding populations in Mexico. Finding macaw feathers in the Everglades expands the known eastern extent of this trade by hundreds of miles. In many Mesoamerican traditions, scarlet macaws are associated with the sun, with fire, with divine connection. Someone brought these feathers a very long way because they mattered. Item number 4 was a bone flute, carved from the leg bone of a large bird, with 5 holes drilled along its length and one at the end. It was intact. Researchers played it. The notes it produced are a pentatonic scale, a 5-note scale that appears in traditional music from cultures across the entire world, from West African music to Celtic folk traditions to East Asian classical music. The flute was small enough to fit in a shirt pocket. Someone carried this with them everywhere they went. They made music with it, and then, for reasons unknown, they left it on a hidden island in the middle of the Florida Everglades, buried in the peat, where it would wait in silence for 3,000 years until Raymond Okafor's canoe scraped against a muddy bank. Item number 3 was a carved wooden post, about 3 feet long, that had been deliberately planted upright in the ground. It was still vertical when Raymond found it, though he initially took it for a root. It had been carved with a spiral design along its entire length, and at its top was a rough but recognizable animal head, a snake, with open mouth and carved fangs. Serpent imagery is among the most universal in human religious iconography. It appears from ancient Egypt to ancient Mesoamerica to ancient India with remarkable consistency. This serpent post, planted upright in the earth of a remote island, appears to have been a marker, a territorial or spiritual boundary marker, the kind of object that says, "This place is known, this place is claimed, this place is sacred." Someone wanted whoever came after to understand that. Item number 2 was a map. Not a map on paper, obviously. Paper would not have survived. But a map incised into a flat piece of manatee bone, about the size of a hardcover book. The map showed a coastline, recognizable with effort as a portion of the southern Florida coast, including the curve of what appears to be Florida Bay and the upper Florida Keys. The island where Raymond found everything, the hidden island with no name on any chart, appeared to be marked on this map with a small drilled hole, a dot of emphasis. But the map also showed something else. A series of other marked points, up and down the coast, connected by lines that appear to indicate routes. Whoever made this map knew this coastline intimately. They traveled it regularly. And they made a record of where they went, what they found, and where the places that mattered were located. This was not the work of a lost traveler. This was the work of a civilization. And then there is item number 1. The object that changed everything. The object that made 11 research institutions spend 3 years arguing about what it meant, and that still does not have a final official explanation that everyone agrees on. It was a clay tablet, larger than the small one described in item 14, about the size of a standard notebook, half an inch thick, and covered on both sides with densely packed incised marks. But unlike the smaller tablet, this one had something else. A second layer of marks, incised with a finer tool, overlapping the first layer in a way that suggested a second person, or the same person at a different time, had added to it. The marks on the primary layer showed the same structured, rule-governed quality as those on the smaller tablet. The secondary layer was different. The secondary marks were sparser, and they included something that stopped researchers cold. Among the secondary marks were images. Small, scratched images that looked like, and this is the word that appears in every published analysis, always with appropriate academic qualification, like fish, like birds, like human figures, and like geometric shapes that recur in a consistent enough pattern to suggest they carry meaning. The tablet appears to show a system in transition. Someone was adding visual meaning to a set of abstract marks, as if they were in the process of developing or translating, or perhaps decoding something that already existed. One researcher, Dr. Yolanda Carver of the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History, wrote in a 2022 paper that the tablet might represent evidence of a writing system developing in real time, or more provocatively, evidence of contact between a literate culture and a non-literate one, with one side attempting to make itself understood to the other. That paper generated 200 pages of published academic responses, most of them cautious, several of them furious, and none of them providing a better explanation. Raymond Okafor did not discover a treasure in the financial sense. He discovered something more valuable and far more disturbing, evidence that the history of human life in Florida, and possibly in the entire southeastern United States, is older, stranger, and more connected to the wider world than we have been willing to admit. These 20 objects did not arrive on that island by accident. They came with people. People who traveled far, who traded across distances we once thought impossible, who built ritual lives of great complexity, who made music and played games and drew their loved ones on pieces of shell, and who understood the landscape of southern Florida well enough to map it. We do not know their name. We do not know their language. We do not know what happened to them. But they were here, and they left 20 objects behind to prove it. If one of these items surprised you, tell me which one in the comments right now. I read every single one. And if you found this worth your time, please subscribe and share it with someone who thinks history is boring, because history is never boring. It is just waiting to be found.